Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And we're doing things a little bit differently, aren't we now, Sebastian?
We are. We've had a change of clothes since our last
podcast
episode.
That's right. But we're also now moving to recording the news item separately to the Bring Me Solutions and Culture Club items.
Yeah.
So this is now the news item.
So this is just pure news and our comments on news. But as always, we're not newsreaders. We are looking at the news issues we're looking at the things that are in the news this week and commenting on them from a social democratic perspective.
Indeed. Things that caught our eye.
Yeah. So,
do you want to go first? I know you want to talk about JD Vance, don't you?
I do. So this is kind of last week's news because this was on the 14th of February that he made these comments or made this speech at the Munich Security Conference, which was a week ago as of recording. But I couldn't resist the temptation to talk about it because for me, it's one of the most significant political speeches that I can remember in my lifetime. And I think it's astonishing as a speech. And to understand a little bit about the reactions to the speech, I think gives you a perspective on why we're in the state we are in and the different political landscape we find ourselves in. So there's a lot of interest and an intrigue within this speech, I think.
You keep saying that every time you listen to it, you like it better.
Yes, I do like it more and more the more I listen to it and read it. And there are some problems with it, but I think it's very interesting. So let me give you a bit of background. The Munich Security Conference first ran in 1963. The attendees of that conference were people like Helmut Schmidt. Do you know Helmut Schmidt?
Germany, yep.
Yes,
yep.
Social Democrat leader in the 1970s.
Okay.
And Chancellor of Germany. Henry Kissinger.
Oh, wow. Right, okay.
So there's some big names in 1963, and generally you get many international leaders. The vice president often goes, the vice president of the US, as in this case, JD Vance, the vice president under Trump, attended and gave this speech. And the Munich Security Conference is designed to focus on security and defense issues, and particularly it was set up as an attempt to prevent another world war. So I want to play you just a clip of his speech and then we can get into it in a bit more detail.
And we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values shared with the United States of America.
So I was just astounded by this because it's something that when he says that line, he says the thing I worry most about is the threat from within. I think, wow, that's really, really exciting.
It is.
Because I think so often in Europe especially, we're constantly demonizing, Russia and China and looking outwards and not thinking about, are we living up to our own democratic values? And the speech is very much, this seems so shocking to a lot of people, especially the more sort of liberal people, but it was a speech in support of liberal democracy. And you think, when do we hear that nowadays? A speech that actually stands up for liberal democracy. So things like freedom of speech, democratic rights. I was just astounded by this. He goes on to talk about the cancelled election in Romania. Do you remember this?
I do, yes.
I think we talked about it as a potential podcast topic and maybe never
I was going to do it, I think, and then we decided we didn't want to do two overseas issues. So
he talks about illiberal actions of Europe. He says about things that have happened in Brussels, Germany. He talks about Sweden, of the man that was convicted of burning a Quran. Yeah. And I think that was in that was his participation in his friend who burnt it and then was killed, if you remember recently.
That's right.
And he also comments, he actually quotes the judge, and he says, the judge chillingly noted, and I'm quoting, the Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief.
That's not free speech then, is it?
It's not. And this is in Sweden, right? And then he talks about, I love this, and perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom. You know, I think we can believe in the UK that America is this huge power that doesn't really care about us. They actually still look to us with a bit of respect, you know, because they recognise the fact that a lot of their values come from the tradition of the United Kingdom. And I think that's amazing as a British person to hear that we actually do still hold some sway in international things amazingly. And he talks about a case of somebody that was praying near an abortion clinic and was arrested for it. But the thing so here's why I like the speech so much, and you can sort of tell me what you thought. Did you listen to the speech?
Yes.
So the thing I like about it so much is that it's easy in this political landscape to make a polemic speech where you go after your opponents, you rile up your fan base, and you exacerbate this exceeding polarization.
Yeah.
Whereas I saw this speech as a bit of an olive branch. You know, he starts it off by talking about how much he loves Munich and how much he loves Germany. He makes a little sort of joke about the fact that he and David Lammy were saying how they're both in new jobs now since they last spoke at the conference last year. It's really conciliatory in so many ways. He's respectful. He makes this joke about Greta Thunberg. I don't know if you heard that, where he says, you know, if we can put up with all these years of Greta Thunberg criticizing us, you can deal with a few months of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Which, again, is really funny, and it's not offending people, I don't think. And so I really think he was saying we can do this. We can stand on the same front in regards to standing up for liberal democracy. Very much in opposition to Trump, even though that this was a speech that was suggesting they're all on the same page. The styles are so opposing. Trump will just come after his opponents, whereas J.D. Vance, I really see there's a hope here of somebody trying to unify people and bring people together.
Yeah. I think the other attendees were expecting to be ticked off for not spending enough on defence, weren't they? But the way he actually used the, as you say, the kind of enemy within kind of arguments, I think there was a massive shock to people, wasn't it? But you know, really good points he was making. I wasn't sure about the abortion clinic one, to be honest, because I think that's a bit more of a nuanced argument about whether it is appropriate to allow people to be right outside a medical facility. But I think there were much better examples he could have used from the UK, perhaps some of the things after the Southport incident. So I'm not sure, you know, you can't really criticise him for not being absolutely on top of every UK political issue, but certainly the principles that he was espousing are really... It's fantastic to hear somebody standing up for those principles of democracy and free speech.
Right. Would you like to hear some of the reactions from people?
Yes, there was somebody crying, wasn't there?
Was there?
Yes,
who was that?
I can't remember now.
Well,
yeah.
I didn't notice this too much on the first listen, but you can obviously, you know that the people in the room are not going to be particularly keen on the speech. But the reports afterwards were much worse than I originally thought. So people came out. So Olaf Scholz, who's the current Chancellor of Germany, he came out strongly against the speech. The person that's likely to be the next Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, he came out against the speech. The same with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Germany, all of the German politicians. Somebody called it a bizarre and intellectual bottom, which I thought was interesting. But the thing that was most egregious in my eyes was the BBC article. And I criticised the BBC so strongly because I hold it in my heart somehow, I love the BBC, and I hate the fact that it's gone down this hole of political bias.
Yeah.
And anybody that says it's not bias, I have so many articles I can point you to. Let me read you this one. So this was written by somebody who didn't say it was an opinion piece as such.
Okay.
But it said this year's Munich Security Conference was supposed to be about two things. And it goes on to talk about that. Instead, JD Vance shocked delegates on Friday by roundly attacking Washington's allies in a blistering attack. It was a very weird 20 minutes, one met largely with silence from delegates in the hall. Even a joke, and he goes on to quote the Elon Musk Greta Thunberg joke, failed to raise a single laugh. To me, that says, by the people in the room. It didn't.
Yes.
It did not fail to raise a single laugh by the millions of people that have watched that speech. And I think he was speaking to us more than he was speaking to the people in that room. And Vance's speech went down very badly, unequivocally badly. It was extraordinarily poorly judged. Not at all. Like, the person that has written this does not understand politics.
No, you're
really
right.
doesn't understand it. And I don't know how they get to these positions where they have so much influence in writing for the BBC when they don't understand the basic politics. It says, who is it aimed at? And a US commentator said to me afterwards that it was all for US domestic consumption.
Oh, I don't think that's right at all.
No, I think they're way off the pulse on that one.
Yeah.
And I think, personally, I think that JD Vance will actually be upset with a few things from the speech where it wasn't the perfect example of oratory. He made a couple of slip-ups. I think he was a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
But it was still the best speech I've heard in a long time from a politician.
And the nice thing about it is that if he is the kind of the brain behind Trump, that gives you a lot of confidence that maybe, they will be going in the right direction.
Yeah, I find myself always constantly becoming more and more sympathetic to Trump's cause up until the moment I next hear him speak.
Yes.
And then it kind of sets me back a while.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Trump came out and gave a press conference on the Ukraine issue, which we might get onto talking about next week. And he does not unite people.
He doesn't, no.
He really doesn't intend to.
No.
And I think JD Vance was attempting to. And likewise, if you think that there were sort of three big speeches from similar political actors, Nigel Farage spoke at CPAC, I think yesterday. I don't know if you caught that.
I didn't.
And Nigel Farage does what he does well, but he has a ceiling. Like, he can only do a certain thing, which is kind of get those lines in. It's very sycophantic.
Yes.
We love Donald Trump, don't we? And like, geeze the crowd up.
Yeah.
And if we're going to emerge from this really torrid political landscape that we find ourselves in, we need leaders like JD Vance that can bring people together and try and put that olive branch out there and say, like, what do we stand for? Because we in Europe have to start thinking about, do we want to uphold things like democratic rights and freedom of speech, or do we want to lose that battle?
Yeah. And there's not been a reaction from Starmer, has there, in any?
I think Starmer is trying to be very careful in the way that he
Yes.
approaches the Trump government. And I think people like us that don't see any problem with being friendly with with the American government, we don't understand why would that be an issue. But I think within Starmer's base support, there are a lot of people that are outraged if he says anything that's not awful about Donald Trump.
Yeah, yeah. But you would think that, there'd be a lot of people on the left, so, in the Labour Party, who would actually really like the speech. It seems very odd that there hasn't been more appreciation shown in the UK from the left.
Well, I think that speaks to the fact that our politics is shifting. JD Vance is somebody that I think a lot of people on the left don't know what to do with.
Indeed, yeah.
Because he comes from this very poor working class background. Dickie was talking about him in the interview episode we did.
Yes.
Yesterday we recorded that. He wrote Hillbilly Elegy, of course, which got turned into a very successful film that was nominated for Oscars. And it talks about the struggle of growing up in a very poor situation. And so when he talks about these things about representing the the deindustrialized parts of America where he grew up, people on the left kind of say, but he's Trumpian and he's right wing, and so they don't really know how to handle that. And I think he's certainly not conventionally right wing in the way that we understand it from before.
Yeah, we've said before, haven't we, that left and right are very slippery concepts these days, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, what's the kind of next steps in this? So he's effectively thrown the gauntlet down to Europe, including the UK, to say, well, first of all, step up to the plate in defence spending, but also start to be more clearly supportive of these, kind of liberal democratic values. Where does that go now? It's not.
It's scary when you put the words liberal democratic values together, doesn't it? It sounds like liberal democrat.
Yeah. Sorry, apologies.
Which is a bit of an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of things. So, one, I just want to say before we move on that an aspect of the speech where I did take issue is where he talks about this. Do you see this tragedy where there's somebody rammed their car into a group of people in Germany, and it just happened, and he sort of said, we offer up thoughts and prayers, and then he quotes later on in the speech, he says he uses that as an example of why we should be careful on immigration, which I'm fine with. I agree with him that we need to be really careful about our immigration policy. Where I think it's a little bit of a what would you say, a little bit hypocritical is that, and I don't know about him personally, but certainly if there's a mass shooting in America, the Republicans say to the Democrats, whoa, don't politicize this.
Yeah.
There needs to be a time for thoughts and prayers. So I thought, if anything, that was a bit too soon to be quoting that as a political issue.
Yeah. And presumably before it's absolutely clear exactly what happened.
Yeah. And then on your question of where do we go from here, Firstly, I don't know. Anybody that says they do know is lying to you. We are in a new world politically. I don't think anybody can doubt that now. Trump coming in was uncertain, but now we can see that he's not going to go along with a lot of the stuff that's been happening. He's not going to do a sort of 2016 to 2020 term, which was quite conventional Republican president.
Yeah.
Everything is up for grabs.
Yes.
And America is changing its outlook on the world. It's not attempting to be the global policeman anymore. And that means that we in Europe have to step up. And it's a chance for us now to say, right, are we going to actually be serious about our own defence, about being a sovereign nation rather than just being in the pocket of America and having to sort of rely on our big brother?
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a dangerous scenario, though. There's so many kind of flashpoints now across the world, isn't there, where it feels that many of those could spark into really hot wars that we get dragged into.
And that's why it's so important for us to get a grip of this issue and actually handle, not let a good crisis go to waste.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Is that a good place to finish?
Yeah. Absolutely.
This. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Onto your story. So this is a more domestic thing, right?
This is more domestic thing, yeah. So this is a sickness benefit. So there's been quite a bit of press comment on this recently. I think partly sparked by, there's a really good documentary by Fraser Nelson, who used to be the editor of the Spectator, on Channel 4. So you can catch up with that on the I don't know what the Channel 4 iPlayer is called, but whatever it's called, you can catch up with it there. And I say that kind of, I think, has been the spark that has made quite a few people comment on this. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale of this issue, there's about 3 million people now on sickness benefit. And that's probably about double the people who are on unemployment benefits. So it's a really, really big issue. It's about 1 in 15 of the working population are on sickness benefit. It's costing us about £50 billion a year to pay for that sickness benefit. And for people who are on sickness benefit, there are hardly any reassessments going on. So, people stay on sickness benefit for long, long periods. And, that obviously there's an economic problem associated with that. But there's also a really big issue around, people are just being thrown onto the scrap heap and left on sickness benefit without any help. And that includes a lot of people quite young, in their 20s and 30s. This is not just about an ageing population, and these are all people in their 50s and 60s. A lot of these people are quite young. So, why are they not working? That there's a lot of the instances have mental health issues. So about 2/3 of the people mention things like stress and anxiety. And to me, the tragedy is that we're not helping these people. These people are not going to get better if they're just kind of left as victims of their mental health or other health issues. So in the documentary, there's a guy who, he goes to be assessed for sickness benefit, and he's basically an alcoholic. He says, I can't get out of the house without 4 or 5 cans of, alcohol. The assessor asks him, are you still taking cannabis? He says, yes, I am, yeah. And what happens, and obviously you only see what's recorded and put into the documentary, but the assessor says, he'll probably be assessed at the full level of sickness benefit. And at no point in that conversation was there an intervention that said, well, we need to help you. We need to tackle these issues and provide some treatment and care and support for you. It's just like, you just throw money at people and they go away. And that seems to me not just wasteful of money, but wasteful of human talent and creativity and aspiration. And we shouldn't be throwing away all that ability by just, giving people money and saying, get on with it. So it's a massive issue. I think, to be fair, the Labour government have recognised this. So Liz Kendall is the minister at the head of the Department for Work and Pensions, and Stephen Timms is the Minister for Disabilities. And Stephen Timms was writing in the Times, and I thought was quite convincing, in saying that they do really want to tackle this and to really address the issue. So that's good. I think the things that I would say are missing from both the analysis that Fraser Nelson did, but also the government's response is an understanding of why, kind of politically, why is this happening? And so I kind of went back to 2 books from around about 2000 to Richard Sennett's The Corrosion of Character, and to Work Stress, The Making of a Modern Epidemic by David Wainwright and Michael Calnan.
These look quite dry books.
They're not. They're really readable. Richard Sennett especially is massively readable.
If that's readable, then they've done a bad job on the cover art, I think.
You don't like the cover?
Looks like an academic textbook.
Well, I think it is. It is certainly been used by people in the stress industry, if we want to call it that. So the point that's made in that Wainwright book is that lots of things that happen in the workplace have been reinterpreted as kind of individual mental health failings. So at one point, there might have been a situation in the workplace where perhaps redundancies were being discussed. And the response to that would have been a collective response with the trade union, fighting those redundancies, and making cases for perhaps redundancies not to happen, perhaps for productivity gains that might allow more people to be employed rather than fewer. But those kind of collective responses have just kind of disappeared. And people reinterpret their workplace position as being something kind of internalized and something that they experience as stress and anxiety. So somebody goes through perhaps a redundancy situation, internalizes that and makes it very much a stress issue, and then can't really pick themselves up after that to find new work. And that's, I think, quite problematic. That kind of reinterpretation of everything in the workplace as being almost a kind of therapeutic thing, I think is a problem. So that's what the kind of Wainwright analysis would be. Richard Sennett is much more about the redefinition of work and how that changes the way that people experience work. So I know this is probably before your time, but when people were mine workers or...
What's a mine?
Indeed. And we had coal mines. When people were mine workers or engineers or tool makers maybe, they kind of had a pride in work and they had a collective identity through work. And you could be proud to say you were an engineer and you had a camaraderie and a I don't want to be too romantic about this, but you had a support network through your work. And I do think it's very difficult for people to have that identity and groundedness when they're perhaps a shop worker or they work in a coffee shop, and they're on minimum wage and they experience work in a very individual way.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think when you do that, when you experience work in a very individual way, it's very easy to be knocked back by things that happen in the workplace.
I think a large aspect of it is that people don't see the product of their work anymore.
Yeah.
And it's partly because of the division of labour. But tell me if I'm romanticising the past, but when you worked in industry, you could see that what you had an impact on. You could see the end result. If you're helping build cars, you'd take some pride in the end result. Whereas nowadays, everything has become divided up and fragmented, and you're working in a middle management in a big company, and you're sort of not entirely sure what you do. I think a lot of people are not entirely sure what they do, right? And if you get into an honest conversation with them, they'll say, I send some emails, I do these things, but they're not sure what the point of their work is. And I think that's a really dangerous place for us to be in as a society, because people are going, and this is, I would say millions of people are going to work every day and not being convinced of why they're doing that and if there's actually a need for them. And you'll have read Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber.
Yes.
I'm allowed to say that word.
Yeah.
He makes that case in there. And I really think dignity needs to be brought back to the workplace.
Yeah.
Where you can say, I'm proud of the job I do. Whereas nowadays, especially people my age, very few people are proud of their work. And I love it. I've got a few friends that really do like their work. And I love it when I speak to them, because I'm like, oh, great, you can tell me about your job and what you've been doing today.
Yes.
But unfortunately, the majority of people I know my age are doing things like quiet quitting, which we've talked about in the past, where they just turn up, do the bare minimum possible, because that's all that's expected of them, and say, why would I put in any more effort? I don't see the point of it.
Yeah, a little anecdote about pride in your work. I used to do quite a lot of work with KCOM, which is the telecommunications company in Hull.
Okay.
And when they were taking out the old copper wires and putting in new, what do you call it? The thing that light goes down it. Fibre optics, thank you.
I didn't say that with any certainty.
Yeah, that's right, sorry. When they were taking out the copper cables and putting in the fibre optics, you quite often found that when you took out the copper cables, a little piece of paper would drop out, and it was the name of the person who put the copper cables in, because, they, as you say, took pride in their work, and they felt that was a bit of their legacy.
Yeah.
Obviously, at the time when you were putting copper cables in, the telephone was a huge step forward, and they were very proud in what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I think that is a bit different, as you say, for many of the people who maybe work in a call centre or work in a service industry. It's very different.
Yeah, definitely.
So what happens next on sickness benefit? Just to kind of round off the story. Certainly, I mentioned that I do think government are taking this very seriously. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that it's often the Labour government that has to dish out the hard medicine. You know, if the Tories try to take away something like sickness benefit, they would be portrayed as very cruel, you know, the nasty party kind of idea. And I mean, I do hope Labour will do this in a way that's very productive. You know, it won't be just about slashing benefits. It will be about saying, how do we help these people who don't feel able to work to become more resilient, to be able to take those steps into the workplace? How do we support them to do that? And I think some of the things that you could do are things like making sure that there's not a cliff edge. So I think, you know, some people who maybe want to go back to work think, well, the problem is as soon as I start doing even a small amount of work, I lose the benefits, and then, you know, they kind of feel that they don't want to take that risk. Yeah. So I think supporting people to make those first steps will be important, and doing that in a way that it is about supporting and helping people and retraining them. You know, there's I think 800,000 job vacancies at the moment. So, you know, if we can get even a third of that 3 million people on sickness benefit to be able to be trained and able to take on some of those roles, that will make a huge difference. And I mean, Liz Kendall was actually quite helpful, I thought, in saying, to get Britain growing, we've got to get people working, and you know, let's make sure that can happen.
But for people to get working, they have to see a sign that there are opportunities out there. And for the people looking for a job, the fact that there are 800,000 vacancies means nothing to them. And I've been in this boat where you're applying for jobs, and we were speaking to somebody last night that was saying this, who'd sent off 120 applications and hasn't heard back yet.
Yes.
So there are so many issues with this, because, you know, a lot of employers are opening up thousands of people. They have to choose randomly of who they actually respond to, because they literally can't read, you know, 1,000 applications.
Yeah. And
so many people are falling through the cracks and don't see any hope out there of where they can fit into the workforce. And I think you and I both agree that we need opportunities for young people where we say, we want you, you know, to be building new railways and building new cities and developing communities, and like giving them something hopeful that they can be a part of.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So I think, you know, for the young people who are in this situation of not feeling able to work, being able to provide something like that is, you know, you actually, as you say, produce something that you can see. You know, it's really rewarding kind of work. So that's my news story.
Great.
And it feels a bit odd, doesn't it, that we're not going on to Bring Me Solutions now with this new...
That's not our theme song. I don't know what that was, but yeah.
So thank you for listening. Do listen to the other half of the podcast where we talk to Dickie Fletcher in the Bring Me Solutions section, and Culture Club's over there as well if you're looking for that. And we will see you next week.
Thank you very much.